Well, how fun to have you both on together. You've known each other way longer than I've known either of you. So I feel like, I'm kind of breaking up your party here. So,
Well, we don't mind sharing the party.
all
We're
right.
Not
Well,
happy.
at all.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you known each other?
98?
1998? Wow.
99. Yeah.
99.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's impressive that you remember that.
That's really impressive that I remember that.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Deborah is a memorable person. She has had a
She
huge
is.
impact in my life, my career. So yeah, it's
Mm.
definitely she's easily one of my bestest friends.
Wow. Boy, that's
Vice
special.
vice versa. Yeah. I mean,
That's
he's
beautiful.
yeah. It is beautiful, and that was one of the when we all agreed to partner together. That was one of the things that was really important to me. That we would be a partnership that would part as friends if we parted,
Hmm.
and I think we've done that, but we haven't parted yet. So
That's good. Yeah, we don't want you to part. We want you
yeah,
to keep doing the work that you're doing.
yeah.
All right. Well, I have been recording this podcast for 11 years now, and I don't think we've ever done an episode on menopause.
Really?
So, yeah, I mean, we've touched on it. We've talked about sex and aging, but never done an episode specifically on menopause. And yeah, it's interesting. I've not only have had several people reach out to me and say, "Will you please do something on menopause?"
Yes.
But I myself am going through this, so it's
Oh,
like,
bless
okay.
you. Bless you. Yeah, yeah.
It's-
Well, I have two quotes about menopause that I pulled out of other people's stuff, but the national or the North American Menopause Society has a quote, just in their whatever website for women going hunting for information. No clear starting or ending point, odd diversions, and an estimated time of arrival that could span years. Menopause is certainly a trip. So that's how
yes.
they start there. And the other one from another book is the only thing predictable about menopause is its unpredictability.
Wow.
And I thought,
Okay.
yes, those are two great quotes. And I'm so glad. And even my husband said, I'm really glad Julie's doing this. I'll be praying for y'all. So,
Yeah, so with that caveat, then, Deborah, does that mean that everything you're sharing is going to be like, this may happen, this may not happen? Like, we can't give you any certainty of what to expect or time or any of that. Is that true?
we can give some guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all we can give because everybody is going through it differently. And biologically, we're different, and the impacts on us genetically and
Mm-hmm.
systemically are different.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are some general guidelines. They're just not always, the most encouraging. And so
Yeah.
we have to look for some encouragement. One of the books that I did, I was looking for books, and I'm not necessarily recommending this book, but I love the title, "Laugh Your Way Through Menopause."
Okay.
And I thought, okay, we need more of that. We need a lot of joking, and that for me, I think that's one of the thing I would say, like a take home or whatever. If I was titling a talk, would be nobody told me,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
because we don't talk about this.
Yeah.
Even as much as we do, we don't. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've had friends going through menopause, but we don't just sit down and say, what the heck is going on, here? What are you going through? And I spoke to someone this week who was having some symptoms, and it could be because she's post-surgery, or it could be because she's having perimenopausal symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her the classic question for me, when did your mom go through menopause? Do you know? And I have never yet had a woman say to me when I ask her that, oh, it was 48, or oh,
Mm-hmm.
it was 51. They look at me like I have two heads and kind of shrug and no. And I say, if you can talk to your mom, go talk to your mom, because your best guide is when your mom went through menopause, for when you might go through menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother died when I was 38.
Mhm.
So I never had that conversation with her.
Yeah.
And I had no clue when I might
Mhm.
go through menopause.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And she's illustrated the part of the problem, because we don't know, is it post-surgery? Is it some other cognitive issue that's going on? Is it something else hormonal? We don't know, and many times clients that are cross, and you bringing up menopause as the first time anybody has thought about it, he just thought she was going crazy all of a sudden, or he
Mhm.
thought she was just becoming mean. And to be able to step back and say, well, maybe because we can look at something and say this is the flu. The symptoms are pretty predictable, even if they're not exact on. This is not.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just thinking as the journey of womanhood. It's like when you have your first period, there's sisters and your mom and information about what to expect with that. And then when you get pregnant, there's a whole slew of people who
Yes.
want to tell you their stories and walk you through all that. But with menopause, you're right. No one really talks about it. And it's funny that you mentioned laugh your way through menopause. I was on a call a few months ago with two of my good friends. We do a Zoom call once a month. And somehow menopause came up. And we started sharing stories and laughing so hard, but just
Cool.
sharing like, what vitamin do you take with this? And what do you do with that? And I'd never had like that honest of a conversation with other women. So that was really fun.
You know,
And I'm guessing that was really helpful.
yes.
It was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's part of what we encourage women to do, is to talk to each other, to get that support,
Mhm.
Hmm.
to hear the varied stories,
Yeah.
so it doesn't feel as abnormal.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Michael, why is it important for guys to be listening in on this conversation?
Because this is not something that we have a really good understanding of. Our bodies, it's tough to come up with times that our bodies take over, like it does for women. For some women, that's during PMS, and they start to learn, the husband may learn this is not something that's in her control. She doesn't just turn it off and turn it on. It's not intentional on her part. But for many guys, they don't even have that experience going through, and we can't put ourselves in those shoes. So it's easy for us to step back and think, well, she just needs to stop doing this, or she's trying to control me, or she is being something. She's choosing to be something. We don't understand. She's not in control of her body and what that feels like. She's barely in control of her mind and what that feels like. So I think the ability to understand this is something that she's walking through, that in many respects is happening to her, not something she's choosing or has control over.
Mm-hmm. So it gives him just understanding, empathy, and I'm sure you're going to give some good advice on how
I
to navigate that
I
as a
like
partner.
I'd like to comment on that too, because you can't blame men for not understanding menopause when women don't understand
Yep.
menopause. And I would like to step back. One of the things when you're talking about menopause is that you're actually talking about perimenopause,
Mm-hmm.
the actual menopause, which is 12 months after your last period. Then that last period was the point of menopause. And then 12 months later, when you go, oh, I really am done. That's 12 months. I am now post menopause. All of that is menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And
All
so
right.
when you're talking about, if someone's 38 or 45, the average probably is around maybe 45 when we start perimenopause, but it really varies. You're talking about 51, 52, maybe. The average age of the actual last period is somewhere between 50 and 52 in the US. Then, like, women don't know. They're wondering why they're losing their mind. Or I think one of the reasons we don't talk to our friends or anybody else is because some of the cognitive issues that can come up in menopause are so frightening. I've had so many women, including myself, I think this is early Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that sounds funny, but it's not funny. Like you
Mm-hmm.
really think that. Like you can't remember things. You're losing names of people you know well. And you think, oh, that's like old people. Like there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And he may be thinking that too.
Exactly.
Yeah, when she forgets his name.
And
Yeah, well, that's not helpful either. What was your name again?
Deborah pointed out, though, that that it does stabilize, and the research does show some cognitive problems when the hormones are fluctuating so unpredictably. But it stabilizes, and many women come right back to almost or back to that original cognitive state once they get through this storm that's going on. But it can be really scary for both people, wondering, is this who she's going to be at this stage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we back up just a minute and talk about, you say like the storm of hormones, like what hormonally is actually happening in a woman when this whole process begins?
It's a really good question.
Yeah, we would really like to know that. No.
Yep.
Well, it kind of feels that way, like what the is going on? So the simplest way, and it might not be the best way, but the simplest way for me is to say that you have these follicles. A woman is born with all the follicles, eggs she's ever going to have, and so and then they ovulate and they also disintegrate over time. And what happens is when the estrogen starts cutting out and the follicles quit really being able to pop. I always picture my grandmother making popcorn over the stove, pop, 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 all this pop, 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 and that's your normal sort of fertility. And then it slows down a little bit, And then my grandmother, because she was, grew up like way before the Depression even, she would dump that out and put the rest of them back on the heat and kind of turn up the heat a little bit to get those last ones to pop. That is what's going on. It's like the estrogens cutting out. Most of the eggs have, been produced, kicked out, gone on and done whatever they've done, and now those last ones we're trying to pop, and then it's going to stop. And when it stops, because that feedback loop between the brain and the ovaries is cutting out, slowing down, the ovaries aren't responding as well to the messages being sent and all that kind of, then you literally don't create as much estrogen in your body. And I look at, and it's not true for every woman, but I look at estrogen as a happy chemical. It's soothing. It keeps you kind of soft. All the cells in your body like estrogen a lot. And it's a little bit like an addiction where there's a withdrawal. And the cells don't like that very much. I mean, your hair changes, your skin changes. There's usually some weight gain. You have sleep disturbances often. And that's some of that people would say, well, that's from hot flashes. Not everybody has hot flashes. Not everybody has sleep disturbances, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, so I think that begs the immediate question. I mean, we're in the fix-it society. Should we just take estrogen then? Like, I know that for many years that was sort of the solution.
Yeah. And actually, if you look at the medical data, that is a solution for many women. There were women, James Dobson's mom was one of them actually, that were ripped off their estrogen the minute the results of the WHI came out, the Women's Health Initiative study. And it took many years, but later on, that data was reanalyzed and softened a little bit. They used only one kind of estrogen in that study. It's not the kind of estrogen we probably use as much today. It is used, but not as much. It was like a specific
differing levels. They didn't screen for precancers. There was a lot of problems.
So you're talking about the results that showed that it caused breast cancer. That's when everybody stopped using it then?
Yeah, but it doesn't, you've got to be careful. Like there was increased risk of breast cancer and there was 2 times the deaths, but there weren't very many deaths. And the interesting thing is, I had forgotten this, but the WHI, one of the reasons they did that study was they were putting women on estrogen during, hormones, just for heart disease, because the number one killer of women is not breast cancer. The number one killer of women is heart disease. And so they were looking for, is this really working? Are we doing the best thing? So when you get into the messages from this women's health initiative, and my mother-in-law was one of the people who did the rigorous routine you had to do to be in that study. And she did that specifically for her daughter and her granddaughters, which I thought was really special because it was a long-term study. In fact, it's still going on. I don't know if anyone knows that. But anyway, the people like Dr. Dobson's mother who were pulled off estrogen. I mean, literally, like from one day to the next, they were on estrogen, and then physicians were like, nope, you got to come off of it. Some of those women had incredible mental health crises because even quote unquote natural hormone, natural menopause, you just don't stop one day to the next.
Right.
Your body is gradually, that the natural part, quote unquote, is the give and take, the flow, the withdrawal and the giving it back sort of thing, but just go 1 minute to the next that you are,
in withdrawal.
You don't have it. You're in withdrawal.
Yeah.
And, so really, I mean, all the studies, in Britain, they did a 1 million woman study, and they're still trying to parse out, what do we do for women? Because there are true health risks to going through menopause, the whole process, without any hormone supplementation.
Okay.
And especially sexually.
Right.
And that is a big concern.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
What is the impact sexually?
Okay. So the biggest is GSM, genitourinary syndrome of menopause. Mike, do you want to jump in? I'm just talking a lot here.
No, you're doing great. You're the expert in this. GSM is essentially an atrophying of the genitals. One of my clients, he said, I think something's wrong with my wife because there's no form, there's no texture any longer. It's just smooth. And that is part of the symptoms of it. So you have things get smaller, things get smoother, but not in a good way. The tactile sensation, the touch decreases. The vagina gets thicker. It doesn't lubricate as easily. It's not as elastic, so we'll experience a different kind of discomfort and pain that can increase. What am I forgetting, Debra?
I think you said you don't lubricate as much, because the walls become thinner. The walls. I think of it like a pleated skirt. There's a lot of fabric in a pleated skirt. When you pull it out like this, there's a lot. Well, it's as if you took the skirt and you just kept it in A-line and there's no pleats anymore. Because the inside of the vagina has this rugae, all these like pleats. And then when a woman is sexually aroused, those puff up. They fill with fluid, and that's part of arousal. And then that's part of what causes the lubrication. So during menopause, if your walls are getting thinner, you can't produce as much, usually, lubrication. And then also you can't stretch as much, right? Got a lot of room in a pleated skirt, not so much in, just an A-line. So, and what Mike was talking about is a really big shock unless it was a shock to me the first time I was at a conference, a women's sexual health conference. It was highly medical conference, but they were actually showing the changes in the labia and the other structures of the genitals in a woman where there was no estrogen and no estrogen replacement. And the easiest way actually to do that is to replace it in the vagina itself. So you're not dealing with systemic estrogen, you're dealing with topical estrogen. And that can be really valuable for women to know in evaluating, will I do any kind of hormone replacement or not? And some women would say, no, absolutely not. And some women who are breast cancer survivors, their oncologists don't want them having any estrogen whatsoever. And so
Sure.
they need to turn to other options.
Yeah.
Or there may be other health issues that their doctor says it is just not wise for them. It's not, it's a life threat for them too. But to watch the change that occurs when some estrogen creams or some kind of estrogen replacement is used is just is quite remarkable to see that shift back. And that's just localized symptoms. Our as you saw in The Secrets of Sex and Marriage, if we're talking about a receptive type of desire, she needs to experience some arousal before desire kicks in. And
Yeah.
if we've just shut down arousal and made arousal that much more difficult, we've made desire that much more difficult for her. So we see desire dramatically decrease in these women, and they don't feel as sexy, and it begins to snowball and compound, and then more pressure from her husband and more hurt and that goes on in the relationship, and the whole process can spin up.
So, a few practical questions. When should a woman go see a doctor about this? Is it perimenopause? Is it menopause? Like, when does she know she's ready for those conversations?
Okay, that's the one thing. Like, if there was going to be a take home in any of this for your listeners, for me, it would be get good information and start as soon as you question if you're even having some sort of premenopausal, perimenopausal symptoms. It's not like you would necessarily start with hormone replacement therapy if you choose that. I'm not saying everyone should choose that, but it's not like you're going to do it like my first hot flash at 45 or whatever. But you might. I mean, if you start having the 75% of women have vasomotor symptoms, i.e., hot flashes, now called hot flushes, and or night sweats. Okay, so I still remember my sister saying to me, it's like all night, covers off, covers on, covers off, covers on, waking up drenched in sweat so that you get up and change the sheets in the bed. That kind of stuff. Like, your sleep is so disrupted at that point. No wonder you can't remember your husband's name.
Yeah.
And he may be pretty ticked off because you're disrupting his sleep.
Right. So that's one of the symptoms then, is the hot flashes. Is it also irregular periods or?
Yes. So symptoms of perimenopause, the menopausal transition, would be abnormal menstrual bleeding. Sometimes you'll have a really light period. Then, one of the doctors whose books I read, to catch up on what they're saying now, she talked about she had gone 11 months without a period. And so she was going on a business trip. She's a speaker and everything. And she was sitting on the plane and literally just felt this gush of blood.
Wow. Oh no.
And and she was flying, as I recall, like it was a 10-hour flight.
Oh man, that's rough.
And so she's in the bathroom, she was saying, which is a great place for a woman to have to deal with, any on
An
a plane.
airplane bathroom.
Yeah. And then using airplane pads because she didn't pack any.
Sure.
She thought she was pretty bad, which is the thing you hear, which is the other thing. Until you are a full 12 months past the last period, you must use birth control if you don't want a surprise child.
Yeah.
One of my clients last week was right at that point. She said, it's been 11 months. I thought I was finally done. And she said, I get to start back over counting at 1.
Wow. Okay. So when it is time to go seek information, who do you talk to? Is this a general practitioner, your OB? Like, where do you start to seek help?
Ideally, she's going to have this is an ideal. She's going to have an ongoing relationship with somebody where the conversation never just starts. It's it's a question that's asked early on, and it's tracked all through from before it begins all the way through the process. But in our current healthcare system, that doesn't happen for most of the women that I work with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Who
have
would you say, Deborah?
I would say you have to go in with the idea that it's time to start having this conversation. Um, I Let me finish the symptoms real quick. The most
Sure.
common symptoms. So we have the abnormal bleeding, the hot flushes and/or night sweats, which can be followed by a night sweat. You can be hit that blankets off, blankets on thing. It's because you can actually get the chills afterwards because your body's
Mhm.
having a hard time regulating temperature because of estrogen cutting out. It helps
Mhm.
regulate temperature in women. Sleep disturbances and insomnia apart from the hot flashes, but then the hot flashes can add to that. Temporary cognitive changes. That's the one I wanted to touch on, even though I've mentioned it before,
Uh-huh.
because that is
It's good
so.
that you remember that you mentioned it before. That's
Yeah,
a good
yeah.
sign.
Well, that's because I'm way post menopause
Okay.
that I can remember things again. Mike, you remember how bad
I
I was?
remember.
Yeah, we all thought I was really having some serious cognitive. Plus, I had an autoimmune disorder that I didn't know I had, and so
Mm.
between brain fog from the one and brain fog from the other, I was
Mhm.
playing like charades when I was teaching with the team. It was like scary. But anyway,
So the cognitive changes, we mentioned that you can be forgetful. Is it also like difficulty
yes,
concentrating?
yes,
Yeah.
trouble concentrating, trouble with memory,
Mhm.
and just
Trouble learning new things.
oh
Mhm.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
How I remember Deborah saying, "I used to be brilliant. Now I can't
Mm.
remember where I parked my car."
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's, well, that's a new memory, and your
Mm.
brain's not storing those new memories really well during that time when the hormones are in a storm.
Mhm.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And then we already commented on the vaginal dryness and vaginal pain. That can be separate from sex. So you could
Mm.
have vaginal pain, you know, just separate, and then pain with sex as well,
Mhm.
sexual intercourse. Um, and then Mike mentioned decreased desire, arousal difficulties. And if you're having arousal difficulties, you're going to have orgasm difficulties.
Mhm.
So a lot of women in menopause report that they're having trouble reaching orgasm, or it takes a really long time, um, and that's all related to the
Mhm.
estrogen. Joint aches, joint pain, aches and pains in the body, migraines. Women who haven't had migraines start having migraines often, and
Mhm.
women who haven't been who do have migraines find them coming more frequently. I have a family member, an older family member that she has never shared with me, but another family member shared with me that she became suiciidal because her
Oh,
migraines
wow.
would come and then they would last so long and she was in
Mm.
so much pain. Um, and that is uncommon, but migraines are not uncommon in
Yeah.
menopause. Bladder control problems, because of course the estrogen also works on the bladder and the urethra, and all those tissues
Mhm.
are trying to figure out what's going on. Dry eyes, dry hair. I during the menopausal transition, I didn't relate it to that, but I could no longer wear contacts, so
Mhm.
I quit wearing contacts altogether. Dry hair and skin, which that's the weirdest. I mean, there's so many weird things about going through this transition, but that was hard for me. I've never loved my hair, but it was at least soft.
Mhm.
But during menopause, the texture changed, and a lot of women report that the texture of their hair actually changes, and it's a real shock to them.
Mhm.
Heart palpitations, weight gain is common, partly that they think, or whoever the experts think, that's partly because of the sleep problems.
Mhm.
Weight and sleep do have some. Um,
Correlation.
yes,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah.
There's that word thing. So you're doing well, Julie. Um, Mood like depression or anxiety or irritability, and that's again then clicks into what Mike was talking about. For the people you live with,
Yeah.
that's really hard,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that poor guy who has teenage daughters and a menopausal wife. Like, that's a rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my buddies was working over 12 hours a day, and I said, "Dude, what are you doing?" He says, "It's not safe to be home."
Yeah, I get it.
He says, "I've
Yeah.
got 3 teenage daughters and a wife. It's not safe to be home right
Yeah.
now." So,
I can understand
mhm,
why. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So Deborah, back to where we go for help. Do you
Okay,
have
I'm sorry.
ideas? No, that's okay.
Yes,
No, thanks for going through all those symptoms because I've
yeah.
got a mental checklist going on now.
Good, good. Okay, so where do you go for help? In an ideal world, you would be able to find a good doctor who specializes in menopause.
Mhm.
Um, the first thing I would say for any woman would be to do a little bit of research. And I actually, it's up to you. You've probably already done this too, but I looked at newer resources and things people could read, um, and I think that's a good place to start, to find somebody who's pretty well grounded. I mean, there are doctors who tout all sorts of things.
Mhm.
Just because you're a medical doctor doesn't mean that you're really looking at the research. And, I mean, okay, so there are women who say, well, you can't really trust Western medicine. I understand some of that viewpoint, and I'm empathetic to that. I mean, I tried all sorts of things during my menopause transition, black cohash, but some of those things really have been studied now. It's
Yeah.
not just word of mouth and, well, that's what they did in the 1800s, so it must be natural and
So these
good.
are like naturopathic remedies.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
some naturopathic remedies, and but there have been some studies now. I mean, when you study 1 million women in
Yeah.
the UK,
Mhm.
we could probably learn something from that study,
Mhm. Yeah.
or the WHI, even if it was,
Mhm.
the old analysis and the new analysis. There's stuff we can learn from all those women who did all that work. Not
Mhm.
not the researchers, but the women themselves had journals and checkups and submitted blood, and I mean they really
Mhm.
did a lot of work to be a part of that study. So anyway, resources to me to start with would be, um, you could go to the North American Menopause Society, NAMS, menopause.org, and they have guideline, things you can read when if you're just starting out off. But those are, um, doctors and other involved professionals who work in this field and have specialized or have a big interest in this field, who put their stuff together to try and educate women. And I read an English doctor's book, The Definitive Guide to Perimenopause and Menopause, and she has like an app called the Balance app that you can go and look at to track some of your symptoms.
Mhm.
There are other apps too, but there's another group of doctors who specialize in this area put together, I think it's an app, or you can go to their website, My Meno Plan, so that you can start looking at your symptoms, and some of the, like the Menopause Society and ISHWISH, um, which is the International Society for the Study of Sexual Health in Women.
Mhm.
And they have a website called Prosela that has some
really
articles
good.
on it.
Mhm.
And we have a friend, Dr. Christensen, who has written some of the articles for that, who's a sexual medicine doctor. Um, anyway, so the Mayo Clinic has a book, The New Rules of Menopause, and NAMS has the Menopause Guidebook, ninth edition,
Mhm.
current edition. That's not that expensive. So any one of those books to me, you could get and start by reading.
Mhm.
And
And
if you're
just
not,
learn.
and if you're not a reader,
Mhm.
a couple of them are already on audiobook, so you can
Yeah.
walk in the morning and listen to your audiobook. But I think that's a really good place to start, because you're just getting kind of sound, medical, sympathetic information. And a lot of these women became specialists partly because of their own menopause. Like
Yeah.
one of them, her 11-year-old daughter said to her, "Why are you so hot and sweaty?" And she nailed her. Like she reacted really negatively to
Yeah.
her daughter, and her daughter said, "And why are you so cranky with all of us?"
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Well,
it,
I think as you're describing all that, I'm like, man, I don't want to read a book on that stuff or get an app, but I think about when we're pregnant, we do all those things.
Mhm.
Like you get the book that describes you're in this trimester and here's what's happening to your body and here's what vitamins you need. And we get the apps that, we want to show everybody. My
Yeah.
baby is the size of a clementine. It's like,
Yes.
but you're excited about that new life. But I think what you're saying is we also have to care for our own bodies and understand the changes and
Well,
do the things that will help us through this transition.
if you have an OBGYN, literally specialist in women's healthcare, right? You
Right.
know, if you have her having to be told by her 11-year-old daughter, or one of the other books, same thing happened. One of her kids said, "You need to figure yourself out because you're just really hard to live with,"
Hmm.
And they sat down and thought back to, when did I have my last period? Because they
Yeah.
weren't tracking their periods anymore,
Right.
Um, because we all get caught up in life. We're too busy. We can't do that now. It'll be later. But it's now. It's affecting the people we live with and love, and it's affecting us.
Hmm.
And half the time, I think people are walking around kind of scared or not sure what's going on. And
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
and I think it's the other thing is we don't want to be old. Like it's not something that people celebrate. Woohoo, I'm going through menopause. Like I'm going to look like an old lady in a few years. That's the way we think about it. So it's not usually when there's something that causes us to confront our mortality. It's not something we're excited to do. And we do need that encouragement.
I wanted
well,
to punctuate part of what you were saying too, though, Julie, is you went back for a pregnant woman. She's going to attend to the basics,
Yeah.
her nutrition, her sleep, her energy level. And women who've been powering through life on her hormones and on energy, and all of a sudden the engine is sputtering and working some days and not working other days, to just believe that she can continue to power through.
mhm,
That's not realistic, to
mhm,
step back and to say, I have to attend to my body differently. And part of what I
Mm.
tell husbands is your task is to partner with her, alongside of her, not to dictate her to or what to do, but come alongside her and try to join with her in how do we help her to get more sleep if she's open to that? How do we partner with her in her own nutrition goals, her own exercise goals? They need to be her goals, but how do we partner with her to facilitate that?
Mm.
Because she does need to attend to those basics a little better.
Mhm.
mhm.
So, Michael, when you say that, it makes me think this isn't a symptom that you necessarily mentioned. Do women going through menopause have less energy?
Yes,
And did they need to cut back on commitments and things like that?
probably.
Mm-hmm.
Fatigue. I didn't mention that one, but fatigue, profound fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
can be one of the symptoms. Sorry, it wasn't in my list, but I should have
Yeah.
said that. And that, for a lot of women, when they begin perimenopause, they are literally in kind of the height of their career advancement,
Mm-hmm.
and it begins to affect them, um, and they don't know what to do about that, and they don't know who to talk to. Do you go to HR and say, "Huh, I think I'm in perimenopause. I need some like disability,
I need
like
a nap
pay
time.
or something." Yeah, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but actually, this woman, the British book that I read, they have a national health system, and there's a big push in the national health system to acknowledge menopause as something
Mm.
that employers could accommodate to some degree, which to Americans, I think, is like, what?
Yeah.
But if you think about it, these women are in the height of their careers, and this is a temporary condition. A lot of women in America and in Britain actually leave the workforce or change jobs or all sorts of other things. But if we could walk through it differently,
Mm.
they could stay in their positions, keep doing good work with a little bit of accommodation, and then they will hit their stride again.
Mm.
We used to show a film on aging in one of our classes that was made by a sex therapist a long time ago, Lonnie Barback. And they're doing kind of the reporter on the street, and they say, what do you think of when you think of menopause? What do you think when you think of it? And she says, this one with big smile. You remember this one, Mike? She goes,
Yep.
I think of menopause as freedom, freedom. And that's when you are through it,
Mm.
and you're in the postmenopause period, not that, and I do want to stress this too, not that the minute you realize you're 12 months out, all your symptoms go away. That is not the case. Okay. So,
Yeah.
and no, that's one of the things no one told me. No one
Mhm.
told me that when you were done, you weren't done. You still have some symptoms to deal with.
Mhm.
But I want to slip that in there for your listeners, that don't get your hopes up that everything's over at 12 months past, because you'll probably be dealing still maybe with hot flashes or however you've chosen to treat it past that. I did
Mm.
want to say, Julie, so you were saying, where do you go? I would say read first, look at some resources, and then, yeah, open up the conversation. You can start with your general practitioner. Generally, that's not going to be a really good place to go, but it could be dependent on what your GP is like. But a good OBGYN would be better. I was very, very blessed to have a urogynecologist as my gynecologist for a while, and she was literally perfect through this. Um,
Mm.
and then there are these
And
people that actually specialize in having,
Yeah.
menopause resources.
and
Mhm.
I'm always impressed at how women heal each other. When you
Mm.
guys start talking to each other and you share what works and what doesn't, and nothing works for everybody. That's part of what's difficult in this, is everybody's body is so very different. One woman says, I had to not drink caffeine, anything caffeinated at
Yes.
all. And another one's like, oh, that didn't affect me at all. But them talking to each other and just supporting, and you could speak to this, Deborah, but I can't imagine the feeling of being out of control.
Mhm.
My body is doing this to me. I cannot think straight any longer. I can't get my body to all the energy I used to have. This sense of being out of control has to be a little scary. And to be able to come alongside each other and to walk away going, okay, I can do this. I'm not abnormal. I'm not broken. My friends are different, but like me.
Mhm.
There's something healing that happens when
Mhm.
women lean into each other and get honest about what's going on.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah.
Especially if it's not a friend that says, menopause, I just breezed right through it. I didn't
Yeah.
have any problems whatsoever.
You
Like
need
There
to
are
that's
find a
always
just
new
those, aren't
friend.
there?
not helpful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not helpful. So
Yeah.
and it is, I don't know if it's true, but it's true, that some women have said that. But I've known many women who didn't have a lot of trouble, but did have trouble. But a lot of us weren't talking about it when we were going through it. And to be really honest, some of it I've forgotten, which
Mhm.
is nice because
Sure.
it wasn't pretty.
Yeah,
You
why do
know?
you want to remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to close with this, Michael. Like, for the guys that hung with us through this conversation, you talked about partnering with your spouse through this journey. What are some practical ways that husbands can do that?
Recognizing her sense of out of control. He feels out of control too. Um, he may often feel like, she's doing this to me. She needs to control it. He may tell her to control it. He may try to prescribe. It would not be uncommon for many men to try to fix it for her.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And none of that's going to work really well. To step back, to try to understand her sense of being out of control, that this is not intentional. Her mood swings are not intentional. Um, what can I do to help?
Mm.
And instead of prescribing something, to step back and how can I be available to you? What would be helpful to you at this point? And I think an enormous amount of grace during this time is part of how we partner. Um, and I tell guys, you've got to keep the long-term view.
Hmm.
Like Deborah said, this is a season, this is a stage. For some women, it seems like it lasts way too long.
Hmm.
Um, but she will come out of this. This is a developmental stage for her. And if he can keep his eyes on, we will get through this and we'll be fine on the other side of it. The last thing that I had several things, but the last one that I would want to get into here is, I often see that when guys realize, oh, this is menopause, or it happens with other hormonal things, it's easy for them to put everything in that bucket.
Hmm.
And that's not partnering with her either, because there's still some times that he's just not being a good husband.
Mm.
There's times that, he may be going through his own changes and
Hmm.
is not doing really well either.
Mhm.
And when she tries to complain about it or she speaks up about it, and maybe she doesn't do it in the best way, but he just puts it in the bucket of, oh, this is menopause and dismisses it. That's not partnering with her.
Mhm.
Sitting down at the table and really engaging in the conversations, um, I, I think I think is part of how we just come alongside and support one another.